This is Salmond and Sunday on LBC, leading Britain's conversation, and this hour we're talking Brexit. Yes, we're talking Brexit again, but we're talking Brexit with a twist, because this weekend it emerged that the Prime Minister's entire Social Mobility Commission, led by former Labour Minister Alan Milburn, has resigned. And they've resigned because they believe the Prime Minister is betraying the families that voted for Brexit because she's spending all her time in Brexit and none of her time in social mobility. So that's the charge for this hour. Is the Prime Minister betraying those who voted for Brexit because that is consuming all of her attention and key issues like social mobility are on the back burner? Now, we have a very special guest to discuss this with us for the first part of this hour, and that's Joanna Cherry QC and MP, the member of the Brexit Committee, which reported on Friday about the goings-on thus far in the Brexit process, and the SNP Member of Parliament for Edinburgh South West. Welcome, Joanna.
Thank you. It's lovely to be here.
So your report, the Brexit Committee report on Friday, was a wee bit lost in the hullabaloo that was happening with the Donald Trump tweets and the possible investigation and everything else that happened. What were the absolute key findings of this cross-party committee?
Well, I think one of the key findings, which is very relevant to the debate that's been going on this weekend, was about the question of the border between the north and the south of Ireland. Because our committee, which reported by majority, but a majority of members in the committee all backed this report, have basically said that it's very difficult to see a solution to the border problem unless the United Kingdom stays in the single market and stays in the customs union. And so I think what this shows is it's not just the Irish government or the EU 27 being difficult. Cross-party committee of MPs from all parties in the House of Commons have said that really it's impossible to find a solution to the border problem, or very difficult to see how you could, unless the United Kingdom stays in the single market and the customs union. So that was one of the key findings.
So how many people in the House of Commons are on this super Brexit
There's 21
committee?
of us.
And from the amount of work that you've had to do in terms of covering all of the multifarious issues around Brexit, do you have sympathy for Alan Milburn and his resigned commission who say, look, we can't get on with the job of social mobility because the Prime Minister's preoccupied by Brexit?
Well, yes, I do. And I noticed that Alan Milburn said that the approach of the government to social mobility was characterised by indecision, dysfunctionality and a lack of leadership. And I think that's pretty much what characterises the UK government's approach to Brexit at the moment. Indecision, dysfunctionality and a lack of leadership. People pulling in different directions, people like Boris insulting the Irish when he goes there, Theresa May so busy trying to sort out her cabinet's infighting that she's not actually able to take any decisions about the Brexit process, which is why we find ourselves right up against the deadline without having solved the problem of the border in Ireland.
But surely Boris Johnson, I mean, he insults people across the planet. I mean, his insults are not confined either to the Irish or even to other Europeans. He insults people on a fairly even-handed basis and across the entire world, does he not?
Indeed, and I think even the Foreign and Commonwealth Office recognised that, because his officials specifically told the Irish government to ignore anything that Boris said when he was over there recently. And I understand that he's pretty much being bypassed, and there's quite frantic work going on behind the scenes to see if the British government can come up with a solution to the border issue this weekend.
But Joanna, when people listening to this, many people who voted for Brexit will be hearing you and saying, look, yeah, Joanna Cherry, one of the leading pro-Europeans in the House of Commons, very learned leading pro-European, of course, but nonetheless, everything that she says is going to be coloured by the view you think this whole Brexit thing's a disaster in the first place. So why should one of our listeners who perhaps voted for Brexit believe you when you say, look, this is a real problem?
Okay. Well, I think in politics, as in any argument, you can't really be effective unless you try and understand the other side's point of view. And one of the things I've noticed since I got elected to Parliament 2 or 3 years ago, travelling around provincial England to go to things like Any Questions and Question Time, is that there are very significant parts of England that are extremely run down with very poor social fabric, poor housing, poor NHS and poor education. And I think what Alan Milburn's Commission's work has shown is that the vote to leave very much correlates with those areas of England that have been, in a sense, left behind. And I think Scotland is different because we've had a devolved government for 20 years and under a successful successive Labour Lib Dem in your own government, we've been able to take steps to improve housing in Scotland, improve health and education. I think those steps haven't been taken in these swathes of provincial England which feel a bit left behind. While London and the South East booms, they don't. So I think the Brexit vote in these areas was very much a protest against the fact that these people feel that they have been overlooked and left behind by the metropolitan elite, London and the southeast of England. But what's really interesting is that Alan Milburn and his colleagues have resigned because they say that although Theresa May uttered all these fine words about wanting to help people who were just about managing... And
when she entered Downing Street.
Indeed, she made a speech perhaps a little bit reminiscent of Margaret Thatcher's speech when she entered Downing Street, promising many great things. But what's significant about this, these mass resignations over the weekend is that these people have resigned because they say she's done next to nothing to try and close the social gap and the attainment gap, in contrast, of course, to the Scottish Government, who are taking very significant steps in Scotland at the moment to try and address poverty and close the attainment gap.
If I remember correctly, Margaret Thatcher quoted St Francis of Assisi when she entered Downing Street, although there was a fairly limited putting into practice of St Francis's teachings in the next 10 years, as I recall it. But nonetheless, Joanna, I mean, coming into Parliament, into these discussions as a trained advocate, one of Scotland's leading advocates, apart from taking a massive drop in your salary, are you kind of struck with the almost irrationality with which people address these issues? I mean, in your committee, between the Brexiteers on the one hand and people like yourself who are passionately pro-European, do you actually manage to get beyond the politics and identify some of the issues which are a real difficulty for people? Well,
I think we have with this report, Alec, because the majority of the committee, including several Tories, have got behind this report, and we've really gone to the heart of the issues, and we've looked at issues such as the Irish border, but we also looked at the citizenship issue, and we said really that if the EU and the UK can reach a deal in protecting citizens' rights, that deal ought to be ring-fenced. But if that doesn't happen, then the United Kingdom should make a unilateral declaration to protect the rights of EU citizens in the UK. And in doing that, we weren't ignoring the rights of UK citizens living in the EU 27, because we heard evidence from them, the same committee in the last Parliament, and they told us, organisations representing the UK citizens living in the EU 27, that they would like to see the British government make a unilateral declaration of rights of EU citizens living here, because they felt that if that was done in the UK, then the EU 27 would reciprocate. So the committee has cross-party, Tory MPs, Labour MPs, SNP MPs, one Plaid Cymru MP and one Lib Dem have all supported the idea that if a deal can't be reached, then there should be a unilateral decree, a unilateral guarantee by the United Kingdom government. And of course the House of Commons voted for that last week when the SNP held a debate on this issue, and the Tories didn't turn up to vote, so the motion went through that there should be a unilateral declaration. So that was one issue we addressed.
That's a non-binding vote in the House of Commons. But you've identified, obviously, the kind of three issues which have been cut before we can go on to discussing the trade. That's been the position of European citizens, the money being paid to the European Union, which Boris Johnson once upon a time said they could go and whistle for, but we now know is 50 billion and rising. And thirdly, the position in Ireland in terms of the not having a border in Ireland between north and south. Of these three issues, Joanna Cherry, with your experience, which one do you think is proving the most intractable?
It's the Irish question is proving the most intractable, which of course has been something that's been the case for the UK for more than a century. But the difficulty with the Irish question is, on the money, the British government can throw the towel in, and that's what they've done. Having huffed and puffed, they've thrown the towel in and they're going to pay the money now. On EU citizens, they could also throw the towel in by recognising that the Court of Justice has to have some ongoing role in protecting EU citizens' rights. But on the border, it's not just a question of throwing the towel in, it's a responsibility to come up with an actual solution to the problem of how you maintain an open border if the south of Ireland remains in the EU, as they wish to do, and the north of Ireland leaves the single market and the customs union. So the difficulty for the British government is they can't just throw in the towel, they actually have to come up with a concrete solution to the border issue. And I think that's why it's proving the biggest stumbling block, because to quote Alan Milburn's word, Alan Milburn's words, it's an indecisive, dysfunctional government with a lack of leadership. This is a really difficult problem. Our committee, the committee I sit on, said there probably wasn't a solution to it. It was hard to see a solution, and I think that's why the British government are becoming unstuck on this.
Joanna, can I ask you something? Would you be prepared to stay on for the next 20 minutes or so? I want you to take some calls from people who favour Brexit, who want to say, and perhaps who think, look, you know, why isn't this happening? Is it just a sabotage by the Remainers? I mean, is Theresa May being unfairly pilloried for not being able to get on with things? Is it people like Joanna Cherry and your colleagues on that committee who are raising all these problems? So I want people, listeners who favour Brexit, in particular, and other people phone in as well, please, but who can put questions direct to Joanna and see if you can put her to the test and work out why she seems to be engaged in this committee but raising all of these difficulties with what could have been or should have been, or perhaps the people thought would have been a fairly simple process. Joanna, you've said what the various problems are. You've said that the Irish question is intractable. Has there ever before been a situation where Ireland, because of the backing of the other EU 27, has effectively ended up over the next few weeks in a more powerful position than the British government?
I hesitate to be categorical, but I think it's unprecedented for Ireland to be in a position to effectively call the shots. I mean, we saw Donald Tusk in Dublin on Friday basically saying it was up to the Irish government to be satisfied, and the remaining EU 26 would wait to hear if Ireland was satisfied with the solution to the border. But I think it's really important for your listeners to understand, Alec, that this isn't the Irish government being capricious. The Irish government's got a legal duty to protect the terms of the Good Friday Agreement, as has the British government. And this is what this is really all about. People fear that if there's a hard border with border crossing posts and infrastructure on the border, it will be a magnet for those terrorists that remain on both sides of the Irish question, the extremes of both sides, to cause difficulty. And I think none of us want that. So Britain having created the problem by voting to leave, it's our duty to solve it.
Thank you, Joanna Cherry. So please put your questions and thoughts to Joanna on the way that these Brexit negotiations are going, and whether Theresa May is so obsessed by the Brexit process that she's effectively betraying those who voted to leave the European Union. She has no time, according to Alan Milburn and his colleagues on the Commission on Equality, to deal with that issue because the government is consumed by Brexit. So